Yeah, it's life on the outside. Today is Sunday, February 3rd, 2008. This is the Harry Thomas Show Week in Review. I'm your host, Harry Thomas. The website is located at harrythomas.info, and that is where you can find all the news stories and media that I talk about on today's show. I've got a lot of stuff to cover today, so let's get right into it. January 26, 2008, the Ron Paul campaign filed caucus challenge with Louisiana GOP. Ron Paul's presidential campaign filed a letter with Louisiana Republican Party to contest the credentials of delegates to the state convention. The initial failure of the Louisiana GOP to properly determine who was and who wasn't eligible to vote threw the entire process into disarray, said Ron Paul campaign manager Lou Moore. However, voter eligibility was just one of many irregularities in the caucus process. We are filing this contest to ensure that we can challenge the results if it appears that delegates were improperly selected. Now, this is what the deal is now. We're heading into September, and we're going to fight the whole way for delegates, because that is actually who is going to decide who gets the nomination. Not the media, not the press, not the big business, but supposedly the delegates in September. We'll have to see how this comes out. And you can remember from last week all the reports on election fraud going on throughout the primaries. And we've got more of that coming up later on in this show. Here we go. Ron Paul cheated again during CNN debate. Corporate media engages in mass public deception as Congressman receives just a third of the questions given to Romney and McCain. CIA trainee Anderson Cooper directed just 5 questions at Congressman Paul, as well as 2 half questions, the answers to which he interrupted on both occasions. In comparison, Mitt Romney fielded 17 questions, and John McCain got 15, not including the time the two spent bickering with each other about their past statements. Ron Paul did have something to say about the two bickering.
Congressman Paul, this comes from Jay Majumdar from Roswell, Georgia, and he wants to know if you agree with Senator McCain's statement that the United States might need to have U.S. troops in Iraq for as long as even 100 years.
I don't even think they should have gone. So keeping them for 100 years, where's the money going to come from? You know, the country's in bankruptcy, and when I listen to this argument, I find it rather silly because they're arguing technicalities of a policy they both agree with. They agreed going in, agreed for staying how many years, and these are technicalities. We should be debating foreign policy, whether we should have interventionism or non-interventionism, whether we should be defending this country or whether we should be the policemen of the world, whether we should be, running our empire or not, and how are we going to have guns and butter. The 70s were horrible because we paid for the guns and butters of the 60s. Now we're doing the same thing, and nobody even seems to care. The dollar's crashing, and you're talking about these technicalities about who said what, when. In 1952, we Republicans were elected to stop the war in Korea. 1968, we were elected to stop the war in Vietnam. And tragically, we didn't stop it very fast. 30,000 more men died. So when I talk about these long-term stays, I think, how many men are you willing to let die for this? For something that has nothing to do with our national security. There were no Al-Qaeda there, had nothing to do with 9/11, and there was no threat to our national security. They never committed aggression. It's unconstitutional. It's an undeclared war. And we have these silly arguments going on about who said what when. I think it's time to debate foreign policy and why we don't follow the Constitution and only go to war with a declaration of war.
And I have to say, I have to applaud Ron Paul for standing up against these GOP warmongers. And I have a link to all of Ron Paul's responses at the CNN California debate up at the website. Now, Fox friends, they completely snubbed Ron Paul in the Florida coverage. I've got this clip up. Fox has deemed Ron Paul a non-entity in the Republican race for president and never mentions his name in 2 hours of coverage of the Republican primary in Florida. And this is just another case, another example of media deception. Now, Ron Paul's amazing straw poll results, over 60 Republican straw polls have been conducted since June of 2007. Of these, Congressman Ron Paul has won a substantial 67% majority. Now, Ron Paul head-to-head records are Ron Paul versus Rudy Giuliani, 55-8. Ron Paul versus Mitt Romney, 45-18. Ron Paul versus John McCain, 57-6. Ron Paul versus Mike Huckabee, 54-7. This seems to indicate that there's something happening in this presidential campaign that has yet to be covered by the mainstream media. And that's because the mainstream media is corporate owned and it has an agenda and it has done a pretty good job marginalizing Ron Paul. Giuliani admitted that Ron Paul won all the debates. This is what he said.
I want to congratulate each of my opponents on a hard-fought campaign here in Florida. I want to congratulate Senator McCain, who I believe has been declared the winner. I spoke to Mitt Romney and told him my regard for him as well. These are honorable people. They're accomplished public servants, and they're good men. And we should, as well as Mike Huckabee. So let's applaud them all. They're our opponents. And Ron Paul, who won all the debates. On that thing where you call in all the time. I used to watch it afterwards at night when I'd go back to my room, and Ron Paul would win all the debates.
And I'll take it, even though that did sound like sarcasm. Giuliani is exiting the presidential race. The only surprise was that he lasted as long as he did as a national frontrunner. Now, Thompson's pullout gives Paul a better chance. And this is an interesting take that came out of the Daily News Journal in Tennessee. Fred was well aware that even with Tennessee, he was not going to make it. By pulling out now, and with Mike Huckabee's campaign running very low on money, he was able to clear the field for Ron Paul, the only remaining true conservative with sufficient money available to carry on to the very end. And that's a very interesting take on that. And I've got this. I'm going right into this. Edwards is quitting the presidential race. He said that it was just time to get out. Even though his advisor says he doesn't like it, it was John's decision. John Edwards ended his campaign today in the same way he started it, by standing with the people who are too often left behind and nearly left out of our national debate, Hillary Clinton said. Now, Obama told reporters that Edwards had exited the race in a classy way. And I just want to say that if he was really serious, wouldn't he have stayed in the race at least until after Super Tuesday? He is just a shill, and he got out because he didn't want to take any votes away from Hillary Clinton, since they're both Bilderberg members, and I'm predicting that she's going to pick him as her running mate, vice president. Now, we're going to be back in the next segment to cover some more Ron Paul news and then get into some serious fraud. Thanks for listening.
While walking through the streets of downtown, showing my support of Dr. Paul. Met an uptown slack-jawed troglodyte who simply didn't seem to care at all. And he said, there's lots of Paul support out here, but signs and banners ain't convincing me. Let me tell you, boy, I'm a die-hard blue-blood delegate, and I'm giving all